Okay. Anyway, if I had time, what I would show you, I have a bunch of slides. Well, I can show you about 30 people who all say that the goal of life, what the goal of life is, you know what Marcy says it is? It's the expansion of happiness, the expansion of bliss. We're here to enjoy. Enjoyment is the purpose of life. Now, the greatest enjoyment comes when we expand from our individual self into the universal self. That's the supreme bliss of knowing who we really are, knowing that our real nature is infinite bliss, infinite, eternal, unbounded bliss. And I can show you some of the most well-known people in the world, great scientists, poets, described exactly that state. Now, if we had time, I would show you a lot of people, well, Plotinus, Hegel, Proclus, I said, these are people who describe the self-interacting dynamics of consciousness, I would say almost exactly in the same terms that Maharishi uses. And not because Maharishi didn't read Plotinus, and Plotinus lived 2,000 years before Maharishi, so how do they come out saying the same thing? It's knowable in experience. It's universal experience. It's experience that is the foundation of an exact science of consciousness. And that's what we have to develop here, is we have to develop the foundations of this science by showing that this experience is universally the same across all cultures. It's not Eastern, it's not Western. It's universal knowledge, and it's the foundation of our very Western heritage, as well as the Eastern heritage. And this division between East and West is totally artificial. When you look at the great minds of East and West, they were all describing the same thing. And what happened to it? What happened? How did it get lost? Well, sometime around mid-20th century, I would say after the atomic bomb was discovered, and we realized, hey, knowledge has some pretty good organizing power, people said, we got to do more science. And so science became the chief paradigm of the 20th century, empirical science. And when the scientists of the 20th century look back on the history of philosophy, they said, these people were just speculating about something beyond human experience. They were conjecturing about a metaphysical world beyond. No, they weren't. They were describing the deepest level of human experience. The deepest level of human experience is the same in everyone. And they were describing it in the same way across all cultures. So this experience that they describe is the foundation of an exact science. And I'm just giving you a very brief overview and outline of how this knowledge can be established. It's universal knowledge. It's solidly based of those who transcend. Not everybody experiences it. So Hume said, I don't have this experience. And so he said, other people must be speculating about it. So everybody was speculating about they were just making up conjectures about the self and the identity of the self and the simple, unchanging identity of the self. They were speculating. And that's what Hume concluded. David Hume was the arch empiricist of the 18th century, and he turned philosophy almost entirely around and made philosophy to be at least the history of philosophy, he came to see it as just a purely speculative conjecture, and nobody has this experience, and nobody could have it, because experience meant to Hume perceptual impressions. Well, perceptual impressions are not the way you know consciousness. You have to get rid of all perceptual impressions and experience consciousness without any activity and without any impressions or sensory qualities. Well, Hume was on the wrong track, but today Hume is regarded in the British empiricist scientific tradition as the greatest philosopher ever lived. He's the only philosopher who wasn't even a philosopher. He didn't have the experience that the others had. He was a complete loser. And yet he's taken today to be the greatest philosopher ever. Well, it's a crime against the history of philosophy. Well, anyway, I don't mean to say he's a complete loser. Hume was a very intelligent man. I mean, I think we have to love everybody and appreciate everybody and never give anybody a hard time. But Hume really set philosophy on an unfortunate course. And that has resulted in the 20th century that everybody thinks that the history of philosophy was useless, impractical, ungrounded, unfounded speculation and conjecture. And the whole history of philosophy was the discovery of the potential of the human mind to transcend and experience pure consciousness. That's the new revolutionary view that I'm going to try to bring out. Anyway, I think we'll see plenty of evidence, and I wish I could do more here, but let's see if there's anything more right quick. If God is in that good state, which we sometimes are, this compels our wonder. And if in a better state, this compels it yet more. Well, we could go on and on through the history of civilization. I wanted to show that how everybody, not everybody, so many people describe the way to this knowledge as a complete settling of the activity of the mind. Tom's translation hits it right on the head. You have to settle the activity of the mind. That is how you get this knowledge. And Fred's research, Dr. Travis's research, completely shows, yes, physiology is in a very deeply settled state. The EEG is in a highly coherent alpha phase coherent state. That defines restful alertness, and that defines what it means to settle the mind. To settle the mind is to go to that deeply settled state. We can see it objectively through the research. And that's what philosophy should be doing, is exploring the full potential of the mind and going into that domain of experience that the great philosophers all describe. And that domain of experience is exactly what Maharishi describes and brings out on, Maharishi refers it to the Vedic tradition. And as it should be, that's where the credit should go. But the ground of that experience and the scope of that experience is found in every tradition. And not just all the modern traditions, but I can go into the ancient American Indians, the Ani of Japan, Sub-Saharan Africa, the Norse traditions, and I can show volume 8 in the series shows that the ancient traditional cultures describe this because they had a simplicity and they didn't get clouded by all the complications of the Western world. They describe pure consciousness exactly and very clearly. The traditional Hopi chant says, "There behold me, seated in unchanging bliss. There behold me, seated in unchanging bliss. Behold me." That's how the chant begins. Anyway, I can show you hundreds of examples of that. It's ancient traditional cultures. It's in the Veda. It's especially dominant in the Greeks. The Greek whole civilization was based, it happened, as Dimitri can tell you, the whole Greek civilization happened when a technique of transcending was brought into Greece by Pythagoras and Zalmoxis and Democritus, who all came from India back into Greece and that's when the golden age of Greece flowered. And that magnificent art, sculpture, architecture, drama, all the glory of Greece, the birthplace of Western civilization, happened because a technique was brought in, and Socrates describes it very precisely. And he talks about a hearing that hears itself, a knowing that knows itself, a seeing that sees itself. But what is that? It's just pure consciousness, consciousness knowing itself. And that, and I'm only giving you a tiny fraction of the whole thing, but you can see that the Greeks had this knowledge, and that brought the great glory of the golden age of Greece. It was the knowledge that came out in the Renaissance and was rediscovered in the Renaissance. It was the knowledge that Descartes made popular in Europe and brought out the age of science. This is the knowledge that has brought our civilization to the level it is. And if I wish I had time to go into the modern scientists of today who Planck and Eddington and Jeans and Einstein all had experience of this level, and they knew it was the basis of space-time. And Schrodinger knew you had to get out of space-time, you have to transcend space and time to get into that state of pure consciousness where all laws of nature are structured. And obviously, these are the people who wrote the most important equations that define modern science. So it's not, this is not something, it's not some speculative fancy world. They had tapped into a source of knowledge that led to the development of modern science, and the full range of modern scientific discovery came from people who I can show had tapped into this level of experience. How about great inventions like inventors like Tesla and Edison? Edison wrote in his diary, and this will be my last point, and I'll stop and have some questions. Edison wrote in his diary, I woke up at 6 a.m. today and dived down into that deepest level of silence. What was he doing? Did Edison have a technique? Madame Blavatsky brought a technique from Tibet into New York City in the early 19th century, and Edison and Ford were two people who had learned a technique of meditation from Madame Blavatsky. Tesla learned from a different teacher in Chicago at the World's Fair, who he met. I think it was a disciple of Vivekananda. And anyway, the greatest minds, Ford, Tesla, I don't say the greatest technologists, Ford, Tesla, Luther Burbank, the greatest minds of the technology of the 20th century had been into this place deep within. It's not inside the mind, it's deeper than the unified field. It's deeper than the finest grain of creation on the level of the unified field. Anyway, I think I've given you a glimpse of where I'm coming from. And it's such a joy. I wish everybody at MIU could take a year-long course in the history of philosophy, starting from the Rig Veda to the 21st century. Because you'll see Maharishi knowledge is universal knowledge. It's not Eastern knowledge. It's not an Eastern theory. It's not, it's based on an experience that is universal.